It's the 2022 World Cup. It's the squad update for Qatar. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we will be updating Qatar's squad for the 2022 World Cup. We have done a podcast on the groups which took a close look at Qatar's team, as well as a player media cast which went through each of the candidates for making the final squad, and that ended with a prediction of the starters. This media cast is an addendum to that. In other words, we won't be repeating all of that information, but we'll simply be adding on to it, maybe summarizing it a little bit. It's not necessary to listen to the full version, but the conclusions we draw here are both based on that information and explained in more detail in that full-length podcast. So we do recommend the full player media cast. But if we have time, we are hoping to release a player version giving a bio of just the 26 players on the final squad. So that would be kind of an edited version of the full-length podcast, focusing on the 26 players who actually made the squad. And the final squad has been released. For most teams, a preliminary squad was released too. For Qatar, there was a training camp which had 30 players, so we took that to be their preliminary squad. And today we'll find out how accurate we were in our predictions in the main player podcast or media cast. So we're going to list the names of the candidates here. The candidates we considered definite, likely, and possible we'll go over, and then announce who made the preliminary squad and then the final squad. As we guessed, most squads had a few surprises, some players who didn't make it, and some new or unexpected players who did. Truth be told, Qatar not so much as some other teams. But if we hadn't gone over the player in the main podcast or in the main media cast, we will go over the bios of those players to help you to get to know them. And we're going to summarize the players at the end and tell who we think are going to be the starters. So we'll also discuss whether the selections and the games played since June 2022 have changed our thoughts on our predicted starters and the team's progress in general. All right, I think my shirt situation is getting ever more pathetic. I actually like this as a representation of Qatar, but the problem is it's not a shirt, it's a sweater, the kind of sweater I wear when I'm teaching. And I do have a little flash of white because I think there is a flash of white in Qatar's tournament. So Qatar's outfit. But I gotta say, it's on the whole a fairly pathetic rendition. Really just getting the colors as closely as I could. So I gotta work on my international shirt tournament. Not even wearing a sports shirt here. That's ridiculous. Anyway, let's move on with the podcast or with the media cast. I gotta change that because it's a YouTube version too. So I should say media cast. Let's look at formations. We won't go into great detail. We did go into more detail during the main player podcast. And I'll just put up a graphic here. It's stunning how many games Qatar has played, and that has continued. So mostly in the main player podcast, we looked at their participation in the CONCACAF Gold Cup, in the Arab Cup, and in friendlies up to June 2022. And as you can see on this, if you're looking at the YouTube version, there are 12 games that they have played since after June 2022. So that is quite something. And usually we don't do a graphic for those games, but just to kind of give you a taste of what we're looking at, I'm going to actually put the games up here. So I'll quickly talk about the teams that they've played. So they're all friendlies, some of them non-official friendlies. One was with Lazio, the club team in Italy. Then they played Morocco A and Ghana A. And I think the A means that they weren't the main players of those countries, but I looked at the rosters. There were a couple of main players that tended to be the ones who played in Africa. Those games, by the way, were played in Austria, as was a friendly with Jamaica. They played the Croatia under-23 team, and they played Canada, Chile, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, and Albania. Most of those games were in Europe, either in Austria or in Spain. How did they do? Well, not that great. The only World Cup team they played was Canada, and they were really overrun in a 0-2 loss there. We're happy about that in Canada, but it doesn't bode that well for Qatar. Otherwise, they did do well towards the end, beating the Guatemala, Honduras, and Panama, as well as Albania. So a good finish to the run. However, with Lazio and Jamaica and Chile, it was a draw. And with Croatia under-23 and with Canada, it was a loss. So, doesn't bode that well. Anyway, this section is more about formations. So their preferred formations are either a 5-3-2 or a 3-5-2, which are very similar. It just means the in the 5-3-2, the wingers move back. So it's just the wingers moving up and down. So generally with Qatar, we have a three-man defense, three-man central defense, and usually a two-man forward line. Okay, that is a bit of a summary of their formations, and some of them we couldn't even find the formations for. I used a couple of sources, and for the last game against Albania, I got two different pieces of information from two different sources. So anyway, one of them was a 5-3-2, which is a formation they use quite regularly. Okay, on we go with our main piece of business, talking about the squad. So we're basically going to introduce the candidates here, and then we'll say which ones made the preliminary and final squad, and we'll talk. We'll finish each position with a bit of a summary of the position about how it went in the period from 2021, basically the beginning of 2021 up until June 2022, and then a comment on how it looked in the friendlies since June 2022, to see if there were really any significant changes. So the manager is Felix Sanchez. So he has been the manager of Qatar since 2017, but actually has been involved with Qatar through a connection with Barcelona. He's been involved with the Aspire Academy in Qatar, kind of a famous academy there, since 2008. So he's been developing this team all the time, preparing for it, arguably for 14 years. So Felix Sanchez, I don't think they'll get rid of him at this point. Okay, and then we'll talk at the end about starters. Of course, we can view him as the starting manager. I don't think I'm giving away too much there. Okay, but goalkeepers, the candidates we had were definite candidate Saad Al-Sheeb and Michal Barsham. A likely candidate was Yusuf Hassan or Yusuf Hassan Ali. Possible but unlikely was Saleh Zakaria. And we had a couple of players who seemed to be off the squad, but actually, unless they made the squad, we're actually going to delete the names from this list. So the definite candidates are Saad Al-Sheeb and Michal Barsham. Both made the preliminary squad. Yusuf Hassan also the preliminary squad, and possible candidate. One moment. Sorry, I had a tickle in my throat there. Possible but unlikely candidate, Salah Zakaria. I said possible, but it was actually possible but unlikely. Did make the preliminary squad. And then when we look at the final squad, Saad Al-Sheeb, Michal Barsham, the definite candidates, made the squad. Yusuf Hassan did make the squad. Salah Zakaria did not make the cut. Okay, so let's go back and look at the goalkeeper position. Actually, it was almost always Saad Al-Sheeb in the games played from 2021, actually all the way back to the Asian Cup in 2019. But Michel Barsham did play in the 2021 Gold Cup, so getting a little practice there. In the recent friendlies, there was a lot of rotation among the keepers. And so we'll talk about at the end whether that seems to threaten the starting position that we had nominated Saad Al-Sheeb for. All right, let's move on to defenders. We're moving pretty swiftly in this media cast. And for defenders, we have Bassam Hisham or Bassam Al-Rawi. He seems to go by both names. I'll call him Bassam Hisham Al-Rawi just to kind of cover the bases there. He is our first definite candidate. Keep in mind that it's a three-man central defense for Qatar. Also a definite candidate, Boualam Kouki, a definite candidate. And finally, Tariq Salman, the third definite candidate. And then we drop all the way down to possible but unlikely candidates. And normally I won't mention these, but you'll see why I'm going to mention Jassim Gabber soon. Otherwise, we'll delete the candidates that we talked about in the main podcast. Okay, so central defenders, just 4 candidates there, but they do have backup from the wing, from the right and left back. We'll see that shortly. And in terms of who made the squad, well, we'll skip the preliminary squad actually, because all 4 players I'm talking about here made the final squad. So Bassam Hisham Al-Rawi on the squad, Boualam Kouki and Tariq Salman, no surprise that they made the squad. However, a surprise that the possible but unlikely Jassim Gabber made the squad. We had him as possible but unlikely because he didn't start any of the 15 games since the 2021 Gold Cup. Yeah, sorry, we used the Gold Cup as the reference point, the starting point for Qatar. And he was on the bench only for 2 games, but he was with the under-21 team for a few games, so perhaps performed well there to earn his spot here. So I don't know if we detailed him. I'll just tell you quickly. He has no caps for Qatar. He's 20 years old and plays for Al Arabi in Qatar. In fact, he was a consideration for the Gold Cup in 2021. He was selected for the 60-man preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. So he has been around for a little while. Nevertheless, a surprise that he made this team. So let's talk about the position in general. And as we said, almost always 3 at the back in their formation, and usually these same 3 players. So Bassam Hisham Al-Rawi, Boualam Kouki, and Tariq Salman, pretty consistently there. And as I mentioned, the left back, that's Abdel Karim Hassan, and the right back, Pedro Miguel, kind of nicknamed Roro, sometimes come back into that 3-man defense. So they're kind of the backup for that position. In fact, Pedro did it increasingly during the friendlies after June 2022. And we also saw the roving central midfielder Mohamed Wad also coming in as a replacement sometimes. He usually showed up when he was there on the left side of that 3-man defense. So, right, let's move on to the left backs. And we've mentioned Abdel Karim Hassan. Sometimes you may hear the name Fadlala associated with him, Abdel Karim Hassan Fadlala. And he is a definite candidate for us, as is Homam Ahmed, a definite candidate. And in fact, those were the only candidates in this position, and both of them made the final squad. So Abdel Karim Hassan Fadlala and Homam Ahmed, you will hear their names during the Cup. So in terms of the position itself, Abdel Karim Hassan quite often replaces in central defence, as we said. And when he does, that would leave Homam Ahmad to play the right back, or that would be the 5 men at the back formation, or more often the right wing. So just kind of moving up from right back to right wing when that's the case. Otherwise, Abdel Karim Hassan is usually the starter, and as we said, sometimes on the field together. So that continued into recent friendlies. However, the right back, who we're going to meet shortly, Kadir, Mossab Kadir's, during the friendlies, came across to play in the right wing position a couple of times, right back or right wing position. So yeah, they kind of switch around, backing up each other in various positions. Let's move over to the right back position, and we have definite candidate Pedro Miguel, sometimes called Roro, and I think there's another name associated with him too, Carrera. I haven't heard that used that much, but it's actually, his full name is Pedro Miguel Carrera, but some sources just have Roro. Okay, he's the definite candidate. Likely candidates, we have moved Ismail Mohammed. I think we did that during the main player podcast. He's coded as a left winger, but he fits into this discussion better. Kind of one of the candidates as right or right back, right winger, even though he's coded mainly as a left winger. Ismail Mohammed, a likely candidate, and also Mossab Kadir, who we just talked about as sometimes moving over to the left. Mossab Kadir, also a likely candidate. And we will drop the ones below that off the squad because they didn't make it. And we will talk about who made the squad here. So in this case, all 3 of them made the squad. So we don't need to talk about the preliminary squad here. And we'll summarize the position. So actually, Pedro Miguel was quite firmly entrenched in this position in the period that we examined in the main podcast. So that would be from the 2021 Gold Cup up until June 2022. And even then, he sometimes went back into central defense, which did give Kadir and Ismail Mohammed a few opportunities on the right wing or as right back. Since then, Ismail Mohammed has come into it more over the recent friendlies. We kind of considered Kadir the backup, I think, and Ismail Mohammed seems to have taken over that backup position. And in fact, maybe even challenging Pedro Miguel for the starting position. Personally, I doubt it, but he is getting enough starts to make that claim. So again, it's possible that both can be on the field, just like on the left side, with Pedro Miguel playing as the right central defender and Ismail Mohammed, or possibly Mossab Kadir playing on the right, as right back or right winger. So there we go, and then we'll come back at the end to talk a little bit more about who we think is going to be the starter. Meanwhile, we move on to the defensive and central midfield. We typically do these together because the positions overlap. And for defensive midfielders, we have Karim Boudayev as a definite candidate, and then we have Salam Al-Hadri as a possible candidate. And we'll drop off the players below that. In the central midfield, we have Asim Madibo as a definite candidate, and Mohammed Wad as a definite candidate also. Furthermore, we have Ali Asadallah, sometimes called Ali Asadallah Kambar, as a likely candidate. I should point out that he's a bit more of an attacking player, I think. And we'll drop off the players below that because none of them made it. But we do have a new player here. So I will introduce him. And since we didn't cover him during the full podcast, full media cast, we'll introduce him here. And that is Mostafa Tarak Mashal. Mostafa Tarak Mashal. And he got his first cap in August 2022. So during that flurry of friendlies that they played, he didn't start any of their remaining 5 games up until this point. I'm doing this podcast on November 12th here in Canada. So didn't start any of the remaining 5 games, but he did sub in for 1 and was on the bench for 2. However, not selected for the last 2 matches. Nevertheless, made the squad as a part of the 26. So he has 1 cap since 2022 and is just 21 years old, and he plays for Al Sadd in Qatar, as so many of these players do. So he is sometimes called Mustafa Tariq and sometimes called Mustafa Mashal on my sources. We'll have to see what the announcers say, if indeed he gets onto the pitch. All right, well, let's summarize the position of both central defensive and central midfielders together by saying that, first of all, it could be 1 central midfielder or 3, depending on the formation. But rarely is it 2 central midfielders, as most teams have, either 1 or 3 for Qatar. And Karim Boudayev has been the mainstay here. However, he started a little less recently in the friendlies, which gave the others a bit more opportunity. And Wad has been seeing increasing time, Mohamed Wad. But he also plays, he's versatile, as I mentioned before, also plays as a central defender and an attacking midfielder. So he is getting more starts, though not necessarily in the central midfield. And I should point out, actually, I forgot to highlight the players here. So I'll mention what I'm going to say as I'm doing this. So Karim Boudayev on the squad. Salam Al-Hajri actually was not on the preliminary squad. That's the training camp. So whatever happened there, he wasn't on the list, but he did make the final squad. And the same is true of Asim Madibo. So I was shocked actually when I didn't see Madibo's name on the preliminary squad, but there he was on the final squad. Kind of as expected. And Qatar did things pretty much as expected. Not a lot of surprises with Qatar, who have been really developing this team for years and years. So Mohamed Wad also making the squad, and Ali Asadallah Hambar. All right, moving on to left midfield. We have a definite candidate in Abdulaziz Hatem, or he may be called Abdulaziz Abdullah. So I'm going to call him Abdulaziz Hatem Abdullah. I see various versions of his name. And he's the only one in this left midfield position, and he did make the squad. In terms of the position, well, it's more the player than the position. They have sometimes, well, they do use kind of left midfielders as opposed to left wingers, but usually that's filled by one of the central midfielders. So Abdulaziz Hatem is kind of all over the midfield, not necessarily on the left. In fact, in recent friendlies, he's often been playing more centrally, nevertheless a staple in the midfield. And on the right, we don't have any candidates, actually. The position, again, was played by a variety of players, often more attacking players. So we sometimes see the captain, Hassan Al-Haydos, filling the position. But in fact, he's doing that less than he used to. And barely actually showed up in the friendlies since June 2022. Kind of always on the squad, on the bench, but I think he only got on the field for a couple of those games. Meanwhile, central midfielder Asadallah seems to have been taking on a bigger role in recent friendlies, but he kind of like Abdulaziz Hatem, kind of switching positions. It's tough to nail them down. So the left and right midfielder role, a bit artificial here because they don't stick to those positions. Okay, left wingers. The only candidate we had here was Ismail Mohammed, but we talked about him as a right back, not a left back, but a right back, because he fit into that discussion here. However, we do have more candidates as a right winger. So we have Naif Al-Hadrami as a possible candidate, and Khalid Munir Mazid as a possible candidate too. So they don't have a lot of players kind of coded as wingers. Although they do use wingers, we saw that often it's the right and left backs moving up into that role. And both of these players, they're just possible candidates, but both of them did make the squad, the final squad. So Naif Al-Hadrami and Khalid Munir, both making the final squad there. Probably not as starters, but we'll get to that later. Let's move on to the forwards, and we include attacking midfielders in the forward line. And as definite candidates, we have Hassan Al-Haydos and Abdullah oh, sorry, I shouldn't be highlighting them. I'm just introducing them. Hassan Al-Haydos and Abdullah Al-Arak. Well, we talked about Hassan Al-Haydos as kind of a right midfielder. Did we have his name up there? No, we didn't. I just kind of mentioned him in passing. But when he's on the field, he's often on the kind of the right side. But technically, he's an attacking midfielder. Hassan I'm lost. I'm still lost. Okay, sorry, I'm back. I'm going to do secondary strikers at the same time. Akram Afif, I kind of view him as a midfielder who kind of sets up goals, but actually, when I examined it closely, I see he plays as a forward quite a lot, but technically, he seems to be coded as a forward, but I'm going to deal with him here just because in my mind he's more of an attacking midfielder or secondary striker. So we'll deal with all of them together. And Hassan Al-Haydos, despite playing less, we consider a definite candidate, and he did make the squad. And Akram Afif, a definite candidate also, and he made the squad. However, Abdullah Al-Arak, I have him miscoded. That's why I'm getting a bit confused. We actually had him as a possible candidate. I have him as a definite here, but Abdullah Al-Arak, a possible candidate, did not make the squad, and that could be, that is an injury. They don't have a lot of injuries, but he is out with a cruciate ligament injury since mid-August and not due back until May 2023. May! So that's a pretty substantial injury. Must be a serious ligament injury there. He is off the squad. So not really a surprise. He was only a possible candidate, but might have made the squad but for that injury. Hassan Al-Haydos, by the way, is their captain. Maybe I'll add that. Okay. So they're big players for Qatar, so no surprise that Al-Haydos and Afif made the squad. Finally, we look at forwards. So we have definite candidate Almoez Ali, sometimes called Almoez Ali Abdullah, as a definite candidate, and a likely candidate Mohamed Muntari. And we have two possible candidates in Ahmed Ala-Eldin, sometimes Ahmed Ala-Eldin Abdel Motal. Sometimes, you get various versions of the name. And the other possible candidate is Yusuf Abdurisak. And let's see who made it. Again, if they are on the final squad, of course, they were on the preliminary squad too. And most of these seem to be not preliminary squad, but you'll see soon we have a few who didn't make it. So Almoez Ali, a definite candidate, and utterly shocking if he didn't make the team. He's their main goal scorer. And Mohamed Muntari also made the team, the likely candidate. However, neither of the Neither of the other candidates made it. We saw that sorry, I'm getting a bit confused. No, neither of them made it, but Yusuf Abdurrazak did make the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. And Ahmed Alaeldin did make the final squad. So 3 forwards there. Okay, and then we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the players who made the preliminary squad. They were kind of added, so we didn't actually talk about them in the main podcast. 4 players who were kind of added to that training camp, but kind of came and went because they were on the preliminary squad but not selected for the final squad. So that's it. We'll come back to this list for I'm going to actually copy it because I use it below. We come back to this list for talking about the starters. Meanwhile, let's go over a couple of stats. So we did some stats in the main podcast, but that was kind of on all of the candidates that they've used since the 2021 Gold Cup. Now this one is focused just on the 26 players who made the squad. So the average age is 27 years old. 27.0. So on the whole, I mean, I say this in every podcast. At the beginning, we thought 25 to 27 was the range, and 27 was a bit on the older side. But we noticed when doing all of the player podcasts that the average age of players in this cup is a bit older. So 27 is, again, maybe slightly above average, but we have a lot of teams coming in at around this average age, so nothing to balk at there. In terms of just to make it a bit more specific, they don't have any players who are 33 or older. So all of these players just 32 or younger, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players in their early 30s. So actually, that makes them seem a bit younger, actually, than a lot of teams. I guess it's because they don't have a lot of very young players kind of balancing it out, just 2 21-year-olds and 1 20-year-old. Apart from those 3, it's 23 years old or older. So looking good, really, in terms of age. In terms of caps, we usually kind of correlate age with caps. But Qatar plays so many games, as we saw, even in the friendly since June 2022, that the number of caps is outrageous, 56.6. And I think for most teams, let me just check, the average is about, sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble with my document here. Oh my God. The average is 30. Around 30, so they have almost twice as many caps on average. So certainly not lacking game experience. In fact, that could be a bit of a concern. The number of games they play is phenomenal. Total goals is 192, which is really not only a result of the number of games they play, but they are a scoring team. Whether they can do that against European teams remains to be seen. The total goals per cap, which is not worth getting into how we calculate this stat, but it's more interesting in terms of comparison with other teams. 13.0. So actually that is pretty much average. 13.1 is the average, but we have a lot of teams who are less than that. So for an Asian team, that is a good scoring record. So look for Qatar to be an attacking team. And I won't go into too much detail because we did in the podcast, but Almoez Ali has 42 games, 42 goals in 85 games. So just under 50%, but that's a fabulous average to keep up over a long time. And the other main scorers, Akram Afif is at about 30%, and Mohamed Muntari, who really is more of a substitute, at 27%. So those are the players that we look to get goals from. But they do get goals from all over the field. Okay, let's kind of summarize a few things here. So first, we're going to summarize notable non-selections, and really there are none. Qatar has been working on this team for a long time, and usually if you make the team, you're kind of on it. You're kind of on it for good. So it really would be a surprise to see any of their starters dropped from the team before the World Cup. That doesn't fit with the way they've been building the team. We do have one surprise inclusion, though, and that is Jassim Gabber. Sorry, I'll take the highlight off in there. Jassim Gabber. He actually didn't start any of the 15 games since the 2021 Gold Cup, and he was only on the bench for 2 games. So I think I said that earlier. So a bit of a surprise. Again, kind of hard to break into the team, but he managed to do it. As did these players. Oh, I have them all down here, but I'm not supposed to. So as did these players that we'll talk about now, the new players. So we have Mustafa Tarak as a new player. He's a central midfielder, 21 years old. And we kind of gave the bio on him above. We can consider Naif Al-Hadrami a new player because he hasn't played in a tournament for him. Both he and Khalid Munir are right wingers. Neither of them played in tournaments. Both of them were considerations for the 2021 Gold Cup, but didn't make the final cut. So really have just come onto the team. And it's slightly surprising that they're selected as for the final squad. We did have them as possible candidates, though. And then we have 4 players who we won't go into detail with. They did make the final. They did make the preliminary squad, but they were cut from the preliminary squad. So we'll just mention them by name, but no point in going into detail about them. Mohamed Imad, or Mohamed Imad Ayash, sometimes Aisha. Names are a bit tricky with Qatar. And the next one is Abdelrahman Mohamed Fahmy. Osama Al-Teri, he actually was a bit of a surprise call-up to the training camp from where we get the preliminary squad. And same with Ahmed Fadel or Ahmed Fatal Hasaba. Both of them kind of surprise inclusions because they hadn't appeared for Qatar before the training camp. Although they did appear in the friendlies after June 2022. Anyway, no point in going into detail on them because they made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. Let's take a look at injuries. And I gotta say, Qatar is kind of blessed, especially given the number of games they've played, that they're not struggling with injury. So we didn't mention any players in the podcast that were struggling with injury. In the main podcast, there were no players who were struggling with injury, and so nothing to report on those recovered from injury. We don't have any injury doubts on the squad. There could be in the week that remains before, because I think they do play a couple of games, and we only have one player dropped due to injury, which we talked about above, Abdullah Al-Arak. There, and we could have put him in the injured but was not a strong candidate because he was only at the possible level for us. But we think he might have made the squad, but the injury kind of ruled him out. He was a substitute in the 2019 Copa America and in the 2021 Gold Cup, so kind of on the edge of making the squad. Okay, we're going to finish with the predicted starters. And, I think I'd better pause the podcast and populate the list here. Just give me about a nanosecond. Whoosh, the nanosecond has passed before you even realized I was gone. And there it is, the populated list. So let's go through the positions. I'll read out the names just to summarize and then say who we think is going to be the starters. So for goalkeepers, manager Felix Sanchez or Felix Sanchez Bass, and we'll call him a starter. For goalkeepers, we have Saad Al-Sheeb and Michel Barsham and Yusuf Hassan or Yusuf Hassan Ali. Those are the three keepers they're bringing to the cup. And I'm losing control of my graphics here. And we think, even though they used a variety of midfielders, goalkeepers during the friendlies, we think they were just giving practice to the backup keepers. And we think Saad Al-Sheeb is going to be the starter. That's what we said at the end of the June podcast, and we are sticking to it. Okay, central defenders. We have the Rock Three at the back: Bassam Hisham Al Rawi, Boualam Kuki, and Tarek Salman. And we also have Jassim Gabber, a possible but unlikely candidate who made the squad. We consider Basham Al Rawi and Boualam Kuki and Tarek Salman all starters. And that's all I have to say about that. Left backs, the candidates were Abdel Hassan Fadlala, probably going to be called Abdel Karim Hassan, and Homam Ahmed. And between those, we've actually changed our opinion. We did see Abdel Karim Hassan as the starter and Homam Ahmed as the backup, but now we're gonna say both of them. Perhaps a rotating position, or perhaps getting on the field in different positions. Abdel Karim Hassan is a backup for the central defense, so may get starts there. And Homam Ahmed. So definitely one or the other will be on the field, possibly both, but neither of them consistent enough to really call them a starter. So we're being a bit conservative there. On the right back, it's almost getting to that point where it's a rotation of starters. We have Pedro Miguel or Roro. That's his nickname. And we have Ismail Mohammed and Mosab Kadir. So we did nominate Pedro Miguel Roro as a starter, and we're going to stick with that, although we did note that Ismail Mohammed is making inroads. So I'm going to highlight him in yellow as a sometimes starter. Again, Roro might play the backup in central defense, in which case Ismail Mohammed will probably be used as the right back or right midfielder. Moving on to defensive and central midfielders, we have candidates Karim Boudayev and Salam Al-Hadri. And central midfielders, we have Asim Madibo, Mohamed Wad, Ali Asadallah, and then newcomer Mostafa Tarek or Mostafa Mashal. I've seen both names used for him. And despite less starts in recent friendlies, we still see defensive midfielder Karim Boudayev as the main player in this position in central or defensive midfield. So we're going to nominate him as a starter. Madibo and Asadallah do start some games and may get the odd start here, but we see them mostly as backup players. Wad, however, is not a starter in the midfield, but seems to be always on the field. In other words, they seem to try to create a space for him, and sometimes that's in central defense, and sometimes that's as an attacking midfielder. So we're going to be a bit bold and nominate Mohamed Wad as a starter here, a bit tentatively, I must say. Like, I'm not dead sure, but it seems to be that way. Okay, moving over to left midfield, we nominated in the full-length podcast Abdulaziz Hatam as a starter, and by gum, we're going to stick with that. We still see it that way. Right midfielders, the position was played by a variety of players and sometimes more attacking midfielders like Asadella. Al-Haidos, we noted, was filling the position less than he used to. So though he used to be a starter, we don't see him that way anymore. But we don't see Asadalla starting enough to nominate him as a starter. So we're not going to name either of those players as starters. And then left and right wing, generally we see this position covered by the right backs and left backs. So I think we did nominate Ismail Mohammed above as a sometimes starter. But technically he's listed as a left midfielder. Left winger, sorry, I should say. Naif Al Hadrami and Khalid Mudir, the right wingers, are definitely backup players. So we don't expect them to start unless it's an injury or something. And again, we spoke about Hassan Al Haidos. Honestly, I got to say, when I looked at the ages, I thought he would be like 35 or 36 because he seems to be taking on a spiritual role. I'm not being comedic there, but more like a player that they bring along because his character is a big influence. He's been on the team the longest. He's the captain of the team, but he doesn't seem to have the legs to be a starter anymore. So I'm not at all surprised that they bought him, but that they brought him along. But given how much he's played, it's almost as if he's an older player, but he's only 31 years old. So kind of an interesting position, but to be honest, I don't expect him to be on the field other than as a substitute. Maybe a couple of starts, but not really. And Abdul Al Arak, we don't see as a starter either. However, Akram Afif, a definite starter, one of the most important players there. So it would be shocking if he wasn't starting. And same is true with Almoez Ali, the forward. He'll start as much as he can. He'll start all the games, I'm sure. Mohamed Muntari has a pretty good scoring record and does play a lot of games, but that's usually as a substitute. Kind of hard to get in ahead of Almoez Ali and ahead of Akram Afif, because usually when it's two forwards, it's Akram Afif as the other forward. So perhaps we'll see Muntari get one start, but I wouldn't nominate him as a starter. And then the possible candidates, Ahmed Ala Eldin and Yusuf Abdul Risak, definitely backup players there. Okay, that brings us to close to the end of the podcast, but we're kind of going to, rather than reignite the discussions that we had in the team podcast about their prospects, we're going to specifically stick to this question. Does the selection change our opinion of their chances? Well, I think Qatar, and we said in the podcast, has a better chance than a lot of pundits will give them. If you watch them, they're great to watch. They're very speedy. They score goals much more than other Asian teams do. And they're the host. And there's only one World Cup, South Africa in 2010, where the host hasn't passed the group stage. I think that would be a tough slog to pass the group stage, because honestly, whenever they run up against a good team like Canada, honestly, is probably one of the weakest teams in the Cup, and they were overrun by Canada. We saw that in the Gold Cup and in the Copa America. So they've certainly put tremendous effort and time and money into developing this squad. But I think the best that they can hope for is a respectable performance. It would be great if they passed the group stage, but an outside chance. But basically, our opinion hasn't changed because nothing really on the squad has changed. They've been building this for years, and fortunately, they don't have any injuries interrupting. So there we go. We, in summary, kind of said that their best
realistic hope is for a respectable performance at the group stage, and it would really be a bit of gravy for them if they pass the group stage. Not out of the question, but it would be a surprise. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. Keep in mind, we may be editing together a list of the bios of the 26 final candidates. I got to say that depends on our time here. Those will be, anyway, they'll be edited from the Main Player podcast, not a new podcast, kind of outtakes from the podcast. And if that comes out, it'll probably come out in the first few days of the Cup. So I personally want to create that for myself because I would like to go over, have a handy thing to listen to go over as I drive to my brother's to watch the game, you know. I listen to it on 1.5 speed, so I can get through it. Meanwhile, keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with the PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, soccerphiles.captivate.fm. Oops, I keep forgetting to put up the graphic on the YouTube feed here. There it is. And check the show notes for links to our website and our previous podcast series. We're getting close to the Cup, so I hope our podcast is part of your enjoyment of it. All the best and see you next time. Bye-bye.